I should have known something was off. They say your childhood home is where your heart belongs. But what if the door only opens when you bring a check? It was a rainy Thursday when I walked back into my parents' house for the first time in 9 months. The lights were off in the hallway, but a small envelope waited for me on the dining table, just under the crucifix that had hung there since I was 6. No welcome home. No, we missed you. Just my name in block letters. Sharp, cold, final. Inside was a copy of a bank transfer receipt. $50,000, from Dad and Mom Taylor to Miles Taylor. Date 14 months ago. Memo, startup support. Folded behind it was a yellow post-it note. In my dad's handwriting, all caps. Return it. Or don't come back. I remember blinking at the words like I didn't know the alphabet. Like this wasn't my own father's voice in ink. I stood there, the envelope in one hand, my other still wet from the rain. I heard the fridge humming behind me and the clock ticking too loud. The silence was not just silence, it was rejection, echoing like a slammed door. Let me backtrack a little. 14 months ago, I had made what felt like the most terrifying and exhilarating call of my life. I told my parents I was quitting my job to start my own business. I had saved up some, but I was still short of what I needed to build a decent prototype for my interior design platform. I believed in it, I still do. I remember the phone call. Mom was quiet. Dad said, "How much?" Not why, or what's the plan, just, how much? I told him $50,000. He wired it the next day. No conversation, no paperwork, just a quick message, "Hope you know what you're doing." Back then I thought that was love. The kind that doesn't say much but helps anyway. I didn't realize it came with invisible strings, barbed wire fine print. The first 6 months were brutal. The code was buggy. The designers I outsourced to quit halfway. I didn't sleep. I lived off instant ramen and cold coffee. But I loved the work. Every glitch, every 3 a.m. brainstorm, every time a stranger signed up for a beta test. Then, month 7 hit. A so-called mentor I brought in, Dylan, turned out to be a parasite in a Patagonia jacket. He siphoned funds from our shared Stripe account, disappeared, and left me with legal bills I couldn't even afford to read. And when I called my parents, not to ask for more money, just to say I was in a rough patch, Mom said, "We warned you," and Dad just hung up after a long sigh. That was the last time we spoke. Until now, I had returned home not to ask for more, not to beg, just to be home for once. Maybe I thought they'd ask how I was doing. Maybe I still had this leftover fantasy from childhood that they'd hug me, say they were proud I tried. Instead, they left me an invoice. I sat at the old dining chair, the one with the scratch I made in 3rd grade, and stared at the post-it note, "Return it, or don't come back." I should have been angry, but I wasn't. I was tired. Tired of trying to be the son they respected. Tired of pretending their money was ever a gift and not a leash. Tired of asking for validation they were never going to give me. So I folded the note, slipped it back into the envelope, and placed it neatly under the crucifix again. Then I walked out of the house and shut the door behind me. Softly. Like I was sealing a chapter instead of slamming it shut. It took me 27 minutes to walk back to my apartment. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray, like even the universe was withholding sunshine from me that day, and maybe it should have felt like rock bottom. But in some twisted, poetic way, that envelope was the best thing they ever gave me. It made me realize something I'd been too afraid to say out loud. I don't want to come back. Not to that house. Not to their idea of love. Not to being the Miles Taylor who owes everyone an explanation. I don't owe them anything. Not anymore. And if they want a reason to mean what they wrote on that sticky note, well, they'll have it, soon. My older brother's name is Christopher. His medical diploma hangs in the center of the living room wall, framed in polished walnut, lit with a tiny spot lamp like it's the goddamn Mona Lisa. Mine? A BFA in interior architecture. Folded in a drawer. Maybe buried under takeout menus. That's not bitterness talking, that's layout. Growing up, I was always Chris's little brother, never just Miles. He was the golden child, the model student, the boy who volunteered at the local clinic and got invited to golf with Dad's boss. Meanwhile, I was the kid who doodled during church sermons and painted graffiti-style murals on the walls of my bedroom, walls Dad painted over the day I moved out. They said I was creative like it was a disease. When I told my parents I wanted to study design, Mom cried. Actual tears. Not because she was proud, but because she thought I was throwing my life away. She begged me to consider nursing. Something stable. And Dad? He didn't even argue. He just muttered, "Do what you want," then didn't speak to me for 3 days. But Chris? He got a used BMW the day he got into med school. I got silence. To be fair, my parents aren't monsters. They fed us, clothed us, and kept the house spotless. But love in our home wasn't soft. It didn't show up in bedtime stories or birthday surprises. It showed up in spreadsheets and chores done right. I remember one night when I was 14. I had spent weeks drawing a 3D concept of our backyard, complete with a koi pond, tiered flower beds, and a seating area built from reclaimed wood. I presented it to my dad after dinner, my hands shaking with excitement. He glanced at it for maybe 4 seconds. Then he asked, "Is this what you've been wasting time on instead of studying math?" That drawing ended up in the trash. I never showed them another sketch again. I guess that's why the $50,000 felt like a miracle when they first sent it. For a moment I thought, maybe they finally believe in me. But deep down I think I always knew it wasn't trust. It was a loan wrapped in silent judgment. You see, when Chris failed his first anatomy exam, Mom stayed up all night with him, quizzing him with flashcards. When I lost my first client because my site crashed, she said, "Maybe this isn't for you." Even holidays were a reminder. At Christmas, they gifted Chris a premium stethoscope and a custom lab coat. I got a $50 Amazon gift card and a mug that said, "Graphic designer, aka unemployed." They laughed. I laughed too. But later that night, I cried in the bathroom while brushing my teeth. But here's the thing no one sees coming. I didn't want to be their favorite. I just wanted to be seen. To have my dreams taken seriously. To matter for something beyond how well I followed the blueprint of their expectations. And the more I chased their approval, the more invisible I became. So I stopped chasing. And that's when things started to change. There was a moment last year, just a random Tuesday, when I woke up, looked in the mirror, and asked myself, what if they never get it? What if they never will? And the voice in my head, the one I used to silence so often, whispered, "Then build something they can't ignore." That voice became my compass. You know, I'm not telling you this to bash my parents. We all have our blind spots. Some parents give unconditional love. Some give conditions and call it love. Mine? They gave me resistance. And maybe that resistance built the version of me that refuses to quit, even when I'm handed nothing but silence, cold shoulders, and post-it ultimatums. So if you're reading this and you've ever felt like the invisible one, the less successful sibling, or the punchline at your own dinner table, just know, there's a strange kind of freedom in being underestimated. It gives you room to surprise everyone. Even yourself. There's a strange kind of power in disappearing. Not in the tragic, run away from the world kind of way. I mean the quiet vanishing. The kind where you unplug from judgment, tuck your ego into a drawer, and get to work. That's what I did. After Dylan ghosted me, after my parents hung up, after I felt like the punchline of my own origin story, I went silent. No updates, no inspirational quotes, no more hoping for their approval. I rented a smaller apartment, subleased my studio, and canceled every subscription that wasn't directly related to surviving or designing. I worked from a wobbly IKEA desk and ate enough canned soup to start ranking flavors. Every day I woke up at 6. Not out of discipline, out of fear. I was afraid the clients would dry up, afraid the bills would beat the deposits, afraid I was building a bridge to nowhere. But I kept building. I learned back-end code. Not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't afford another expert. I sketched mood boards by hand again, like I did in college. I started small, redesigning laundry rooms, creating virtual mock-ups for realtors, even consulting on a Minecraft server build. Yes, seriously. The gigs weren't glamorous, but they paid. And more importantly, they taught me things I didn't know I needed. 3 months in, I had just finished a project for a real estate agent in Tulsa when I got an email from a name I didn't recognize. Marcy K. Director, Domestic Brand Experience, Hazel Living. I thought it was spam. It wasn't. Hazel was a boutique eco-living startup with actual momentum. One of those rising brands you see in Architectural Digest and think, whoever did their interior has taste. Marcy had seen my Instagram. A single mood board I posted during my Dylan rebuild era had caught her eye. "Your work is fresh and grounded," she wrote. We're exploring freelance collaborators for an upcoming pilot space. Are you open to a call? I stared at that email for a full minute. Then I booked the call. Some give conditions and call it love. Mine? They gave me resistance, and maybe that resistance built the version of me that refuses to quit, even when I'm handed nothing but silence, cold shoulders, and post-it ultimatums. So if you're reading this and you've ever felt like the invisible one, the less successful sibling, or the punchline at your own dinner table, just know, there's a strange kind of freedom in being underestimated. It gives you room to surprise everyone, even yourself. There's a strange kind of power in disappearing. Not in the tragic run-away from the world kind of way, I mean the quiet vanishing. The kind where you unplug from judgment, tuck your ego into a drawer and get to work. That's what I did. After Dylan ghosted me, after my parents hung up, after I felt like the punchline of my own origin story, I went silent. No updates, no inspirational quotes, no more hoping for their approval. I rented a smaller apartment, subleased my studio, and canceled every subscription that wasn't directly related to surviving or designing. I worked from a wobbly IKEA desk, and ate enough canned soup to start ranking flavors. Every day I woke up at 6, not out of discipline, out of fear. I was afraid the clients would dry up, afraid the bills would beat the deposits, afraid I was building a bridge to nowhere. But I kept building. I learned back-end code, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't afford another expert. I sketched mood boards by hand again like I did in college. I started small, redesigning laundry rooms, creating virtual mock-ups for realtors, even consulting on a Minecraft server build. Yes, seriously. The gigs weren't glamorous, but they paid. And more importantly, they taught me things I didn't know I needed. 3 months in, I had just finished a project for a real estate agent in Tulsa when I got an email from a name I didn't recognize. Marcy K., Director, Domestic Brand Experience, Hazel Living. I thought it was spam. It wasn't. Hazel was a boutique eco-living startup with actual momentum. One of those rising brands you see in Architectural Digest and think, whoever did their interior has taste. Marcy had seen my Instagram. A single mood board I posted during my Dylan rebuild era had caught her eye. "Your work is fresh and grounded," she wrote. "We're exploring freelance collaborators for an upcoming pilot space. Are you open to a call?" I stared at that email for a full minute. Then I booked the call. We spoke for 45 minutes. She was direct, curious, and kind. She liked that I'd been through failure. She liked that I didn't try to fake being bigger than I was. "You sound like someone who cares more about the feel of a space than the marketing pitch," she said. I smiled and told her the truth. I'm not here to sell aesthetics. I want people to walk into a room and breathe differently. She offered me a 3-month freelance contract on the spot. That Hazel contract changed everything. Not overnight, but enough. The paycheck helped, sure, but more than that, it validated something no one had ever said to me out loud. You're not crazy for choosing this path. I worked harder than I ever had. I pored over samples, flew out to consult on site, even hand-picked textures with Marcy's team in Denver. And when the space opened, my name was listed. Small but there on the press release. That was the first time my parents could have Googled my name and found something real. I doubt they did, but I didn't need them to. That realization, that I didn't need their permission to matter, was quietly revolutionary. It freed me from the phantom leash of their expectations, and it made me sharper, better, focused. I wasn't rebuilding for them anymore. I was rebuilding for the kid who got his sketches thrown away, for the teen who heard "stable job" every time he dared to dream, for the grown man who once cried over a mug that joked about his future. There's a phrase I wrote on a post-it and stuck to my desk. I see it every day. Let the work speak louder than your pain. It's not about ignoring what hurt you. It's about turning that pain into something that outlives it. To this day, I never told my parents about Hazel. They think I still do something with websites. And that's okay. I don't need to change how they see me. I only need to keep showing up for the version of me that refused to quit, even when quitting would have been easier, quieter, safer. And somewhere in that silence, I found my voice. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and unnecessarily fancy, just like everything Christopher ever did. When I pulled it from my mailbox, I knew instantly. The weight of it screamed, "Look how perfect my life is." I sat down on the front steps and opened it slowly, more out of obligation than excitement. Inside, embossed gold lettering, cursive fonts, and a photo of Chris and his fiancée looking like they'd stepped out of a Vineyard Vines catalog. Dr. Christopher Taylor and Miss Allison Green request the honor of your presence at their wedding celebration. And then came the kicker. As we joined together in front of family. Family, huh? I hadn't heard from either of them in over a year. And now I was invited. No, expected, to clap politely in a rented suit while everyone toasted to the golden boy. I almost tossed the invitation into the recycling bin. Almost. But then I noticed the handwritten note at the bottom. From Mom. Hope you can make it, Miles. We'd love to see you, Mom. No, we miss you. No mention of the $50,000 I had in their eyes, wasted. Just, we'd love to see you. Like we hadn't been ghosts to each other. For days, I debated. A part of me wanted to stay home, eat pad thai in my pajamas, and pretend it never came. But another part, the louder, sharper, more evolved part, wanted to go. Not to gloat, not to prove anything, but to show up as who I'd become. Not the failure they remembered. Not the Miles who begged for their attention, but the Miles who had survived, rebuilt, and thrived, silently. So I RSVP'd yes. I rented a tailored navy blue suit, sleek but simple. I wore a minimalist leather watch from a brand I had worked with on their interior flagship space. I didn't name drop. But every piece I wore that day had a story of work, not wealth. And when I walked into the church, every eye shifted. Not because I was flashy, but because I was unexpected. Like a ghost they'd buried, but couldn't keep down. The ceremony was beautiful, of course. Chris looked every bit the success story. Allison glowed like a magazine bride. The organ music echoed down marble floors, and people we barely remembered from childhood beamed with approval. I kept to the back row during the reception, sipping water, dodging old neighbors, and watching my father give a toast that ended in, "And I've never been prouder to call someone my son." Funny that. I checked my phone during dessert. No messages, no updates. Just my own heartbeat, steady, calm. Then came the moment I didn't expect. Dad walked over to me. Not alone, Mom trailed 2 steps behind, holding her clutch like it might explode. He cleared his throat. "Glad you came," he said. I nodded. "It's a nice wedding." He glanced at my suit, then at my shoes, then at my face. His eyes narrowed like he was trying to do math. "What are you up to these days?" There it was. The question I used to dream about, the invitation to validate myself. But I didn't list my clients. I didn't flash my portfolio. Instead, I reached into my pocket and handed him a folded piece of paper. He took it, unfolded it, and froze. It was a certified wire transfer receipt. To Robert and Cynthia Taylor, amount $50,000 US, memo. With gratitude, no hard feelings. He stared at it like it might bite. "I wanted to return it," I said softly. "Not because I owe you, but because I don't want to carry it anymore." Mom gasped a little. Dad looked hollowed, like someone had scooped out a piece of the narrative they'd built about me and left a blank space. I didn't wait for them to speak. "I'm doing fine," I added. "Better than fine, actually, but that's not why I came." Dad looked up. "Why did you come?" I smiled. "A real one. To close a chapter." I left early that night. As I walked to my car, the wind picked up slightly, catching the collar of my coat. I looked back once at the glowing ballroom. Through the window, I could see Chris dancing with Mom. Dad standing off to the side, holding the paper I gave him like it was made of glass. Maybe it was. Maybe it shattered something. And maybe that's okay. Some things have to break before anyone notices they were cracked in the first place. 3 weeks after the wedding, I received a text from my mom. Just one line. "Your father's been quiet since the reception." No emoji, no follow-up. Just that. I stared at it longer than I should have. Then I locked my phone and went back to drafting floor plans for a yoga studio in Portland. Because here's the thing I learned. Silence isn't always punishment. Sometimes, it's the sound of someone realizing they misjudged you. And that can be louder than any apology. A few days later, I mailed the original $50,000 receipt back to myself. Let me explain. When I had gone to the bank to wire the money, I'd requested a physical copy of the transaction. Not the one you print at home, but the official one. Signed, stamped, and sealed. I kept it. For years, it had lived in a drawer labeled "Someday." Someday I'd frame it. Someday I'd tear it up. Someday I'd hand it back to them, grinning, confident, victorious. Instead, I mailed it to my studio with a note that said, "This isn't closure. It's a reminder that I paid it forward, literally, and that I don't owe anyone for becoming myself." A week later, I was invited to a local TEDx event as a guest speaker. Topic: Designing Identity, Spaces, Self, and Survival. I told the audience about how I used to design bedrooms for imaginary clients when I was 10, how I sketched floor plans on napkins and rearranged the living room furniture when my parents weren't home. I didn't mention the $50,000. I didn't need to. But afterward, a woman in her 40s walked up to me, tears in her eyes. "My dad still tells people I'm unemployed," she said, "even though I run a marketing agency with 12 employees. Thank you for saying it out loud." I hugged her, not because I'm wise or brave or healed, but because I get it. When you grow up with conditional love, even your victories feel like accidents waiting to be invalidated. So one night, I sat at my desk and printed a second receipt. Same amount, same line. With gratitude, no hard feelings. But this time I framed it. I hung it on the wall above my desk. Not to remember the money, to remember the moment I stopped begging to be believed. A week after the TEDx talk, I received an email. Subject: follow-up from the wedding. It was from my dad. 3 sentences. "I don't know if I'll ever understand your world, but I see now you didn't give up. Thanks for the check." That was it. No apology, no warm fuzzies, but something had shifted, and I didn't need more than that. A few days later, Chris called. He said, "I don't know what you said to Dad, but he's been playing your TEDx talk on the living room TV." I laughed. "That's a choice." Chris paused, then added, "You know, I used to think you were just stubborn." I waited, "But maybe you were just ahead of us." That one landed. I didn't know what to say, so I just said thanks. Because sometimes even recognition that arrives late can still feel enough. But here's the truth I don't tell most people. Returning the money didn't make me feel powerful. It made me feel free. There's a difference. Power still cares what they think. Freedom doesn't. And the day I sent that wire, I didn't become a hero or a prodigal son. I became mine. Not the disappointment they whispered about, not the wasted potential they pitied. Just me, self-made, scarred, still standing. And the receipt on my wall? It doesn't say paid back, it says paid forward. To every version of me that doubted I'd ever get here. People ask me sometimes if I ever moved back home. Short answer? No. Long answer? I built something better, not bigger, not fancier, just mine. It started with a message from a student named Jordan. He'd seen my TEDx talk and sent me a DM. "Hey Miles, my parents think studying industrial design is a waste. They said I'll end up broke. Just wanted to say, your story helped me not feel crazy." I stared at that message for a while, then I wrote him back. Not just a thank you or a thumbs up. A real response. We ended up talking for an hour. I gave him a list of books, free design tools, and podcasts that helped me stay sane during my worst months. That's when the idea hit me. What if I created a space for all the Jordans out there? It started small. A newsletter, a Discord server, free templates, a place where creative misfits, kids who weren't med school material or Ivy League perfect, could share, build, ask questions without shame. I called it Studio Rebuild. Because that's what we were all doing. Rebuilding belief in ourselves after years of being told we were too soft, too artsy, too unrealistic. Within a year, we had 10,000 members, then a grant from a nonprofit that supports alternative education paths, then co-working pop-ups in 4 cities. No press release, no flashy campaign, just word of mouth and quiet conviction. And every time someone messaged me, "My mom finally respects what I do," "My dad asked to see my portfolio," "I stopped apologizing for what I love," I felt something shift in my chest. Not pride, peace. Meanwhile, my parents, they stayed who they were. Mostly. Mom sends me recipes now and then. Dad asks how my students are doing. We don't talk about the past. We don't rehash the $50,000. We've silently agreed that the distance between us will never fully close. But it doesn't have to burn either. Sometimes healing looks like a clean scar, not a perfect skin. One night I drove past our old house. Lights on, same mailbox, same garden gnome Chris and I used to make fun of. I didn't knock, I just parked for a minute, watched the porch light flicker and thought, I used to want to be invited back, but standing there with my hands steady on the wheel and Studio Rebuild's latest newsletter scheduled for the morning, I realized I wasn't missing home. I had become it. For myself. for others. There's a freedom in choosing not to chase people anymore, not out of spite, out of strength. I'm not angry at my parents, I'm grateful, in a twisted way. They built walls I had to climb. But in climbing them I discovered my own structure. So here I am, 32 years old, no medical degree, no family heirlooms, but a rented space in a renovated warehouse where young artists come to work, cry, laugh, and try. It smells like coffee and linseed oil. There's paint on the floor. And joy in the air. We built it together, not as a rebellion, but as a reclamation. If you've ever been told that you're too much or not enough, if you've ever been given love with conditions, if you've ever returned money not to settle a debt but to settle your own heart, then maybe you know what I mean when I say, I'm not coming home. Because I already am. If this story meant something to you, share it. Or tell me yours. There's more than one way to rebuild a life. And your version might be exactly what someone else needs to hear.